Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Darati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamstra Shri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parirana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamstra Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sate Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Krupa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschate Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So welcome to this continued Bhagavad Gita study. So today we'll be concluding or finishing the remainder of chapter 8. So we'll discuss verses 8 through 28. So Krishna, in the beginning of this chapter, has given the formula, the very clear formula, by which one can attain his eternal abode. And what was that process? To remember him at the time of death. And just by remembering him, one can attain his eternal abode. And so Srila Prabhupada in the purports was giving us the best process to ensure success in remembering him at the time of death is to chant. To chant, chant, and more chanting. This is the process by which one can begin to train the mind to think of Krishna constantly. And you see in these purports that Prabhupada is quoting the Mahamantra repeatedly in these purports, really to give great emphasis on the importance of chanting the holy names of the Lord. It is the key process in helping us remember Krishna for all times, and ultimately at the time of leaving this body, so that one can attain the eternal abode. So now Krishna in this section is going to be talking about two ways to do this. Two ways to leave the body so that one can be in the right state of consciousness at that time and attain the eternal abode. And the first process is through a mixed process of bhakti, this yoga mishra bhakti. And the second process is through pure devotional service, ananya bhakti. So we'll talk about those two processes. And then Krishna is going to compare and contrast the material world to the spiritual world, because the title of this chapter is Attaining the Supreme. He's going to define and explain why this is truly the supreme, going back to his eternal abode. And so he's going to compare and contrast. And the purpose of that is to inspire us to pursue this goal. If we have some insight or knowledge about some opportunity, it motivates us to go there. Just like if I hear about how beautiful Hawaii is, I become inspired to someday go there. So similarly, Krishna is going to give us some insight into the spiritual world and also compare it to the material world, and thus we'll have a clearer understanding of all the options available to us, and then hopefully we can find some inspiration to render service to the Lord. And this chapter, and it concludes with really then an introduction to the 9th chapter, which is titled The Most Confidential Knowledge. So Krishna is setting up this very sweet conversation that's going to take place in the next chapter. So that's what we'll discuss today. So in the 10th verse, Krishna says, one who at the time of death fixes his life air between the eyebrows, and by the strength of yoga, with an undeviating mind, engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord in full devotion, will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Krishna here is saying how to fix the mind on Krishna at the time of death via this yoga process. And Prabhupada is commenting specifically this Sat Chakra Yoga, controlling the 6 chakras and the life airs. And this is for the yogis who are desiring to become free from birth and death, old age and disease. They're looking for liberation. And Krishna explained this person at the end of the 7th chapter. And the key point here is an undeviating mind, remembering the Supreme. Right? So the key point is to remember Krishna. There are several yoga processes or tools, we can say, in trying to remember Krishna. And these are now given. One is given in this verse, which is fixing the life air and steadying the mind. And this may sound familiar. We discussed this a little bit in chapter 6. So now in 11, 12, and 13, Krishna is going to continue discussing these different tools or processes to practice this type of yoga to help one remember Krishna. Persons who are learned in Vedas, who utter Omkara, and who are great sages in a renounced order, enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now briefly explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Verse 12. The yogic situation is that of the detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all doors of the senses and fixing the mind and heart and life air at the top of the head. One establishes himself in yoga. And finally, 13. After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. So Krishna has described several different processes. So we controlling the life airs between the eyebrows. Again, this is this Sat Chakra Yoga process. He's also added, becoming learned in the Vedas. One should have studied and understood the Vedas. And then, uttering the very powerful Om Kara. Om is the impersonal sound feature of Krishna. And Prabhupada comments in the purport that when we chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Om is also included. And here, one is referring to the personal feature of the Lord. So there are two aspects, but this is Omkara. This is to the impersonal feature of the Lord. And we know that this liberation also has an impersonal feature, entering into Brahman, as Krishna said in verse 11. Practicing celibacy. That is an important part, this process of restraining the senses, right? Krishna further says, closing the doors of all the senses. So these are the different tools in which one can enter into this yogic process and facilitate the remembering of Krishna at the time of leaving the body. And this process must be done very precisely in an exacting manner. And it's very difficult and arduous. to close all the senses, right? To fully control the mind. Arjuna has already said in chapter 6 that this is not very easy or practical. He said it's easier for me to, catch the wind. And Srila Prabhupada talks about, this brahmachari, sort of process. And this process of celibacy is virtually impossible today. Controlling the senses, it's virtually impossible. And that's why Arjuna said, Krishna, this isn't going to work. Right? So what is the recommended process then? Prabhupada repeatedly in the purports is emphasizing to chant the holy names of the Lord. Right? He's emphasizing chanting. Srila Prabhupada says that for the pure devotee, one does not need to do any of this type of yoga because they are fully engaged in Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada has hinted at this, or not hinted, it says it very explicitly in the purports here. And Krishna himself is going to say it in the 27th and 28th verses. So, now, yoga is required to be able to come to this transcendental stage of remembering Krishna at the time of death. So there's no other way to remember Krishna unless there is some type of yoga and some practice of yoga. And so there's either the Satchakra yoga or Bhakti yoga. But some type of yoga must be done. And so Prabhupada is kind of guiding us as to, where to focus our practice of yoga in this chanting process, guiding us towards Bhakti. And so now, the one may ask, well, what other options do we have? If this is so difficult and impossible and impractical in this age, what to do? Are we stuck? So Krishna now will speak about this path, the easier path, that he himself says is easier. So let's discuss verse 14. Krishna says, for one who always remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pratap, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. So Krishna, now having explained the Yoga Mishra path, is giving the path of pure bhakti, this Ananya bhakti or Shuddha bhakti, right? And so he says this is the easier path to obtain him, by which one can always remember Krishna. So both had the same goal of always remembering Krishna, because as we heard in the 5th verse, this is the key, Antakale cha mameva smaram muktva kalevaram. To remember Krishna is the key. So this is the easier path, Krishna says. He says, I am easy to obtain. So there are some key words in this verse that we should discuss. The first is ananya. Ananya chetaha means without deviation in the mind. So this ananya refers to pure or unalloyed, nothing else added. And here, this pure bhakti, as we've been discussing from Nectar of Devotion and in earlier parts of Bhagavad Gita, that it focuses only on pleasing Krishna. One doesn't even want liberation or freedom from birth and death, old age and disease, or the threefold miseries. No other desire. Nothing is mixed. It is purely focused on Krishna. There is no selfish interest, Prabhupada says. When we say unalloyed, an alloy means a mix. That is a metallurgical term used to describe different metals. When you mix, 3 or 4 different metals to create certain characteristics, we create an alloy. So unalloyed means no mixture. It is pure. Right? There is no karma, no jnana, no hatha yoga. Nothing is mixed in there. Right? So this ananya chetaha means undeviating in this purity. So it is constant. Right? So the next term to discuss is this sulabha, which means easy to achieve. So this Krishna is saying sulabha, this pure devotional service in a constant remembering of Krishna is what makes it easy. So it is not easy by any other process. Right? So You can go on mute. Mute other. Mute them. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm just getting some feedback. So the process of pure devotional service and remembering Krishna is what makes it easy to achieve Krishna. Right? This is comparatively. One doesn't have to renounce to the forest. One doesn't have to give up all their assets and live in a very austere condition, trying to stop all the senses, sitting in asanas. No. So it's very, very practical in this process. So Prabhupada, in the second paragraph of the purport here, makes a very nice statement that Bhakti Yoga, he describes it with three terms. He says Bhakti Yoga is simple, pure, and easy to perform. That is right towards the bottom of page 358. Again, Bhakti Yoga is simple, pure, and easy to perform. So let's discuss each of these three terms. That simple. Prabhupada says, just chant, just read, honor prasad, dance, chanting and dancing. So simple. Don't need to complicate things with our own mind. Right? How much intelligence or how much facilities, how much different things we need in order to chant and dance and eat? Not so much. So it's a simple process. Then Prabhupada says it's easy. Now you may think, wait a minute, it's not so easy. I'm not finding it so easy. That is good. We should not think it's easy in that sense. But it's easy in the sense that Krishna comes and helps us. He is so inclined to his devotees. He is so pleased when he sees his devotees performing bhakti that even when we are not fully qualified to do pure bhakti, when we are not doing pure devotional service, Krishna still comes and helps. As long as there is desire. If we have desire, we don't even have to be on the platform of pure bhakti yet. And Krishna is there to help us. And then Prabhupada explains, how does Krishna help? He helps by removing our obstacles in bhakti. We pray to him, for help. And he knows our sincere desire. And then we'll be able to rise early in the morning and chant his holy names. We'll be able to overcome the material impediments and challenges in the world around us. And he gives us the intelligence to know him. Dadadi buddhi yogamtam. And once we know him, then it's easy to remember him. He's so sweet and so powerful and so wonderful. So right now we think so many other things are wonderful. But actually only Krishna is great. So when we know about him, as Krishna gives us the intelligence, then it becomes easy to remember. So it is by the mercy of Krishna. And Krishna is going to explain this in the 9th chapter, how he specifically reciprocates with his devotees. So it is the mercy of Krishna that makes the process easy. And then it is pure. Excuse me, that's the next term, but it is pure. That it can be done at any time, any place. Srila Prabhupada says that a pure devotee creates the atmosphere of Vrindavan wherever they go. How? By their bhakti, by their devotional service. Bhakti is so pure that it can create this realm of Vrindavan wherever they go. And we'll see this reference to purity in the 2nd verse of the next chapter, where Krishna is speaking about this Raja Vidya, this king of knowledge. It is most pavitram uttamam, most purifying. So this bhakti is also very pure. And we know the pastime in Chaitanya Charitamrita of, Gopal Guru. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had went, exhibiting the pastime of going to the restroom, and he found himself chanting in a filthy place. And so to stop himself from chanting, he had, he bit his finger to stop the process. And when he came out, this little boy was there, and asked, why are you doing this? And he said, well, I couldn't stop chanting the holy names of the Lord. And I did not want to chant in this filthy place. And this young boy said, no, you don't know. Holy names are so pure. They can be chanted anywhere, any place. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, yes, you are right. And named him his guru. He just called him Gopal Guru. It was a very sweet pastime. But indicating that any time, any place, one can chant the holy names. They're so purified. Okay? So Prabhupada explains, bhakti is being simple, pure, and easy. Now the third term in this verse that we want to discuss is this satatam and nityashaha. That without interruption, so that one is performing this pure bhakti, that is without interruption. It's done always, regularly. Chanting the holy names of the Lord, not when it's convenient, but 24 hours a day. This is the characteristic of the pure devotee. The devotee does not forget Krishna even for a moment. And he's so attractive. And so Prabhupada says in the purport, these are the qualifications of the pure devotee for whom the Lord is most easily attainable. So it is the quality of this satatam and nityashaha, that this constant engagement that makes Krishna easy to obtain. So this is the qualification. And then Prabhupada says that the devotee never forgets Krishna, and Krishna, not even for a moment, ever forgets his devotee. It is a two-way street, and that is the very sweet reciprocation that exists between Krishna and his devotees. So, again, what is the best way to start this Ananya Bhakti? Chanting. Just by chanting and with strong desire. One doesn't even need to be on the pure platform yet to obtain the mercy of Krishna. One just needs the strong desire to reach the platform of Ananya Bhakti, pure Bhakti. And by taking to the process of chanting, one can obtain it according to Krishna very easily. And because he has said it, we should know it to be fact. Yes, we may have some doubts in our mind. We may think, oh, this is too far, this is too high, I'm too fallen. Maybe all those are true. But because Krishna is saying, I am easy to attain, just build a strong desire to practice this Ananya Bhakti, to be Ananya Chetaha, undeviating in our mind. And Krishna will reciprocate. And he's going to prove it to us several ways in the next chapter. Okay? So now in the 15th verse, Krishna says, after attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they obtain the highest perfection. So what is the result of this Ananya Bhakti, this Shuddha Bhakti? Krishna says, never return to this world, because they have attained the highest perfection. So once one sees this Goloka Vrindavan, the spiritual world, how Krishna can say never. Sometimes we wonder, what if we fall again? So Krishna is clearing that doubt. He says, never returns to this temporal world. And why never? Because once we have experienced the extraordinary bliss of Goloka Vrindavan, there is no chance to ever return to this material world. And that is Krishna's assurance here, and also with some simple logic. Once you have seen a very perfect place, you would never come to an imperfect place. A place that is described by the two adjectives here. Krishna describes the material world as Dukhalayam and Ashashvatam. So the impersonal yogis, They don't obtain this highest perfection, the spiritual world, the eternal spiritual world. They obtain the Brahman, the Brahmajyoti. But the devotees get entry into the spiritual planets. And this verse is describing the results of the personalists, what destination they achieve. And Srila Prabhupada refers to the highest perfection, right? Everybody is looking for the highest perfection. And he says in this verse, the highest perfection of consciousness means, nor do they even want to be transferred to any spiritual planet. They only want Krishna and Krishna's association and nothing else. That is the highest perfection of life. So while Krishna is saying, yes, one achieves his spiritual abode, the devotee is not desirous of even achieving this spiritual abode. What is the devotee wanting? Prabhupada says, they only want to serve Krishna. Krishna and his association and nothing else. This is the highest perfection of life. To become fully desirous, not even to become free of birth, death, old age, and disease. So Prabhupada is guiding our consciousness. While Krishna is saying we reach the supreme abode, the pure devotee doesn't even wish to achieve. And if there is a desire where we say, go back home to Godhead, the purpose of going back home to Godhead is not to become free from birth, death, and old age and disease, but it is to achieve the opportunity to serve Krishna in such unlimited ways, unencumbered ways. So that is the motivation for going back home, back to Godhead. It is to be able to serve Krishna. So this mood of service should be the center of our desire. And thus, Krishna will fulfill that desire. Very nice. So this is the result of practicing this type of bhakti, is one never has to return to this place of dukkhalayam and ashashvatam, temporary and misery. So now, Krishna is going to make sure that we don't get tempted by some maybe relatively better situations than what we have now. He's going to give us the right ultimate goal to aspire for, not to be fooled by any relative happiness, but to search out the ultimate or highest destination. So he's going to compare and contrast the material world all the way up to the highest heavenly planets, to then the spiritual world. And without knowledge of all the different options, how will we know what is available to us? So Krishna is so kind and sweet. He's explaining to us from the highest planets to the lowest in the material world, comparing them to the spiritual world. And this is the great mercy of Krishna. So he says in 16, from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. So from the highest planet in the material world to the lowest, they're all full of misery. Why? Because there is birth and death, old age and disease. Who wants to become old? Who wants disease? Nobody today. Everybody is searching to be free of this disease. Right? Who wants to take birth again? Sitting in a sack upside down in a curled position for 9 months, swimming in your own bodily fluids. Oh. We want eternal, right? Temporary. As soon as something is temporary, there is misery, anxiety. Because anything I have that I'm enjoying, because it's temporary, I know I'm going to lose it. Right? And there's great anxiety. It's going to end. But everything in the material world is temporary. So whatever happiness I have, it'll end. Because that is the nature of the material world. So wherever there is temporary feature, there will always be misery. Because we'll lose whatever it is that we're enjoying. Whereas something is eternal, then there is bliss. Because it'll never end. So Krishna is saying no birth again. It means he is indirectly, and more directly we'll say it later, his world, the supreme abode, is eternal. There is nothing that deteriorates. No body aches, no power outages, no failures of any kind. And thus, there is bliss and happiness. Right? So Krishna is telling us this to remind us that this is a place of misery. Even the higher heavenly planets, where there is relatively more happiness than here, but still, you may fly in celestial airplanes and drink the soma rasa and have, very beautiful forms and live for, relatively longer periods of life, but it is still a place that is not free of misery. And Krishna is saying there's a better place. Right? So he's hoping we'll seek it out. Like a prisoner. If a prisoner has no idea what life is like outside the prison house, all they can aspire to do is find the best home within the prison. But someone outside the prison house knows that's very foolish. There are so many better options. But within the material world, if all I'm looking and saying, oh, what is the best option in this material world? It is like a prisoner trying to find the best option within the prison. Relatively speaking, yes, it may be better. But on an absolute basis, it is quite inferior. So Krishna is being very kind to us by giving us this knowledge of what else exists beyond this material creation. Because within this, it is all dukkhalayam and shashvatam. So ultimately, we want to become free from birth and death, old age and misery, disease. All this medical research is trying to become free from a disease. But we know once one disease is cured, another one comes. So what to do to gain access to the spiritual planets from which one never returns? One has to do bhakti. All the karma, jnana, ashtanga yoga, it must come to the platform ultimately of bhakti to obtain this permanent residence in the spiritual world. Otherwise, the best is some temporary residence in the Brahmajyoti. That is the best. But that is also temporary because once will not be satisfied in such an experience and it will come back. The karma kandis certainly in the heavenly planets, as we saw a couple sessions ago, they return back once their credits are used up. So only bhakti gives this permanent result. And Krishna will conclude this chapter with this statement unequivocally. Right? So we see so much detail in our Shastra explaining all of this, the different systems. So now, in verse 17 through 19, Krishna is explaining the material timeline. By human calculation, 1,000 ages taken together form the duration of Brahma's one day, and such also is the duration of his night. At the beginning of Brahma's day, all living entities become manifest, and from the unmanifest state, and thereafter, when night falls, they are merged into the unmanifest again. 19. Again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being, and when the arrival of Brahma's night, they are helplessly annihilated. So why is Krishna, in the middle of this chapter, talking about the duration of Brahma's life? One may wonder. Well, because he has said that everything in the material world is a shashvatam, temporary. Now, when we observe the life of Brahma, because it is so long, it may seem permanent. It is so extraordinarily long, right? One day of Brahma is 994 yuga cycles. That's 12 hours. And then there's another 12 hours of rest. So one day is 8.6 billion years. And he lives 365 such days and 100 such years. So Prabhupada says it's 311 trillion years is the life of Brahma. But that's still temporary, because it will end. So even Lord Brahma, through pastime, dies. Is not free from old age and death. So, and the duration of Brahma's life is the duration of one breath, one exhale and inhale of Mahavishnu. So there are relative time forms, right? Just like, a housefly. A housefly's whole life is born, grows up, reproduces, becomes old, and dies, all within one day. So, we think, our life is quite long compared to that housefly. But our life compared to Lord Brahma, we are like the housefly. We have a very short duration compared to Lord. But don't think that it is eternal, though it is very long. So Krishna is being very kind here to instruct us that this is an eternal, temporary situation, even up to Brahmaloka. So what happens at the end of each day of Brahma? Krishna says, annihilation. And all the living entities enter into the body of Lord Vishnu. And then in the next day, creation begins again. And all this goes on again and again. Annihilation, creation, annihilation, creation. And what happens at the end of Lord Brahma's life? The whole universe is dissolved, enters back into Mahavishnu, and all the living entities lie dormant, Prabhupada says, for millions of years until they are entering into a new universe. Because Mahavishnu, looking over the Mahatattva, agitating the total material energy, then impregnates the material world with the living entities that are lying dormant within his body. Where they came from? Coming from another universe. So this cycle continues. So the point of all of this is that it should rip away our attachments, because this death is always ripping away all of these attachments. It's very painful. We'll always be anxious for a pending loss of what we have acquired until we come to spiritual life. Even up to the point of Brahmaloka, there is temporary nature. So aspire for a permanent, eternal abode. And that Krishna has been speaking about is Goloka Vrindavan, right? Where there is no repeated birth and death, and from which one never returns. So now Krishna in the next two verses is going to explain his eternal abode. He says, yet there is another unmanifest nature, which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and never annihilated. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. In 21, Krishna says, that which the Vedantas describe as unmanifest and infallible, that which is known as the supreme destination, that from which having attained it, one never returns, that is my supreme abode. So here Krishna now is giving the comparison, right? Temporary and misery. It manifests, unmanifest, this material world, according to a time cycle. He now compares to his abode. So what characteristic we say? We say it's unmanifest. What does that mean? It is not created. It is always there. It is eternal, right? Not a shashvatam. It says here that when all the world is annihilated, as he spoke in the prior verses, the spiritual world remains fully intact. So there is no temporary nature. It is supreme, Krishna says. He said that it is supreme, not full of dukkha. There is no better place that exists. It is the ultimate achievement. It is, Krishna says, infallible. It is perfect. It says that which the Vedantas describe as infallible. It is perfect. Nothing is inferior. And that means because the realm is perfect, also our experience is also perfect. Very important. That's what we want. We want perfection. And it exists only in the spiritual world. So this is a place of unlimited bliss and happiness in service of Krishna. This is the point of our pursuit of bhakti again. Not, a great opportunity in enjoying ourselves, but in serving Krishna. And if there was not such an extraordinary outcome for us to gain, then why when we would detach from the material world? This detachment from the material world comes when there's the opportunity to attach to something better. I'm not going to detach from my $10 bill unless I can attach to a $20 bill. So Krishna is saying, yes, you detach from the material world. And what you'll attain? The Supreme. Something far better. So Krishna is assuring us, drop these pebbles in your hand and pick up these diamonds I am offering you. Right? So this is the point. And what is there? Prabhupada describes very beautifully, quoting from the Brahma Samhita. There are desire trees in the spiritual world. You have any desires, they are manifest. But the devotee only desires to serve Krishna. I would like some mangoes to offer to Krishna, and a mango comes. Oh, I would like some strawberries to offer to Krishna. And in that same tree, immediately, without waiting for seasons or ripening, strawberries come. And anything you want to serve Krishna, the facilities are there. Sometimes in a temple, we would like to make some different things for Krishna. We are limited by the bhoga that is there, the quality of the bhoga, or whatever facilities. But in the spiritual world, there is no limit to the facilities to be used, not for our sense enjoyment, but for Krishna's service. Prabhupada says there are touchstones, all kinds of jewels to decorate the form of Krishna. Surabhi cows for unlimited amounts of milk. Then Prabhupada describes his venum, his flute, the vena. Right? It is so attractive. The flute that Krishna plays creates such an unimaginable bliss that the birds, when they are flying in the air and they hear Krishna's flute, they stop mid-air. They cannot continue flopping their wings because they are stunned by the sweetness of this sound. Even the rivers, they stop flowing, stunned in the amazing quality of this flute. The animate things, like the birds, they become stone-like. And the inanimate things, like the stones, they become trembling and they toss and turn in ecstasy, hearing the sweetness of Krishna's flute. The rocks tremble, and the birds and bees become like rocks. The animate becomes inanimate, and the inanimate becomes animate by the ecstasy of Krishna's flute. His beauty, it's inconceivable. It exceeds thousands of cupids. So attractive. One cannot stop thinking of the beauty of Krishna's form. So this is some of the experiences in the spiritual world. No personality conflicts. Everybody is focused on one thing, enjoying with Krishna, with pure qualities. Our body, our form is spiritual. No getting tired. Endless energy to serve. No upset stomachs. No worried about honoring prasad with Krishna, thinking, oh, I cannot eat this cholesterol or too much sugar. No worries about any of that. No one needs to even sleep because nobody gets tired. Endless. No alarm clocks. One is just constantly enjoying with Krishna. There's never a feeling of being hungry because as soon as that even would manifest, the desire is fulfilled. No headaches or mosquito bites or taxes, nothing. This is the spiritual world. And Krishna is explaining it to inspire us to achieve and to aim for a higher purpose. Don't just try to get a better prison life experience within this material world. Attain the supreme. And thus, remember me. So Krishna now is going to say, in this 22nd verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is greater than all, is attainable by unalloyed devotion. Although he is present in his abode, he is all-pervading, and everything is situated with him. So he is saying, what is the only way? Unalloyed devotion. This Ananya Bhakti. So how to achieve it? Pure devotional service. So we must become one-dimensional, not deluded by other desires of jnana, karma, or yoga. We should be single-minded with strong conviction to only serve Krishna. This is the highest perfection of life. As Srila Prabhupada said just a few verses ago, we quoted from the purport, that the highest perfection is to only want to be in Krishna's service. So, now Krishna says in this verse, although he is present in his abode, he is all-pervading and everything is situated within him. What does he mean by this? That he remains eternally in his supreme abode. Because in chapter 7 he says, I am present everywhere through my para and apara shakti. So Krishna unlimitedly expands himself through his energies in all the material universes, but he remains aloof and undisturbed in the spiritual world. This is the concept of remaining the complete whole, as we saw in the invocation to Shri Upanishad. Right? Purnameva Vishishyate. Remains complete. So Krishna now is explaining, this abode to spark our interest to do this pure bhakti. Right? Prabhupada talks about the variety that exists in the spiritual world, full of options to enjoy with Krishna. How dull life would be if there was no variety. Everything was one color. Everything was one feature, one quality, one emotion. No, there's great variety. Nothing ever deteriorates. So, all of this again meant to inspire us to detach from the material world and attach to Krishna. So now, Krishna is going to explain very explicitly why the bhakti process is superior to the yoga mishra process. In the beginning, he said there are two ways to remember Krishna at the time of death. And he's going to now, in the rest of these verses, explain to us why the bhakti process is the superior process. And this will set us up to enter into chapter 9, in which Krishna is going to give the most confidential knowledge. So we'll conclude these verses now. 23 through 26. We'll read them all together and then discuss. O best of Bharatas, I shall now explain to you the different times at which, passing away from this world, the yogi does not come back. Those who know the Supreme Brahman attain the Supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery God, in the light, and at the auspicious moment of the day, during the fortnight of the waxing moon, or during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. The mystic who passes away from this world during the smoke, the night, the fortnight of the waning moon, or the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, reaches the moon planet, but again comes back. Now kind of a summary in the 26th verse. According to Vedic opinion, there are two ways of passing from this world, one in light and one in darkness. When one passes in light, he does not come back. When one passes in darkness, he returns. So the jnanis, they must leave at a certain time to achieve their desired destination. So they try to practice to become expert to control when the life air will pierce the skull, so they can control it and push it upwards through the skull, through the opening, and enter the spiritual. So they know when to do this if they have acquired knowledge. But those who have not perfected the ability to control the life airs, they are left to chance. Right? So, to elevate to the higher planets, one must know and have the ability to control this time of passing. And Krishna is explaining here in our Acharya's comment that even going through the heavenly planets, one is passed along by the different devatas. And ultimately from Lord Brahma into the Brahma Jyotir. But the summary is pass in light, never return, pass in dark, and maybe up to the heavenly planets, but then back again. So now the worry may become, oh my, I know, what happens to us? How we can be assured of success. So Krishna says in the 27th verse, although the devotee knows these two paths, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered. Therefore, always be fixed in devotion. So Krishna is saying, for the devotee, it doesn't matter. Because they're always fixed in devotion, remembering Krishna whenever they leave. It doesn't matter. They attain the eternal abode. Because Krishna said, whatever you think at the time of death, that you achieve. So because they are fixed in devotion, so for the devotee, this time of day, time of year, time of month, doesn't matter. Just remember Krishna and you'll attain him. So Krishna says, always fixed in devotion. Therefore, always be fixed. Therefore, be always fixed in devotion. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport here that engaging in bhakti, it makes the path home three things. Safe, there's no risk. If you're thinking of Krishna all the time, certainly will be remembering him at the time of death. So it's safe, no risk. It is certain, it's guaranteed. Always means always. And it is a direct, non-stop flight. This is Ananya Bhakti. So in the purport of the 27, Srila Prabhupada says, it is safe, certain, and direct process of this devotional service. So now Krishna will give himself the concluding statement of the superiority of bhakti. He says in the 28th verse, a person who accepts the path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing sacrifices, undergoing austerities, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. Simply by performing devotional service, he attains all these. And at the end, he reaches the supreme eternal abode. So Krishna is giving the assurance to Arjuna that Ananya Bhakti, meaning doing nothing else, it is the complete process. 100% of the time in serving Krishna, nothing is left behind. And this knowledge is what enables us to become fixed in bhakti. Because otherwise we'll wonder, well, don't I have to do this? Well, don't I have to do that? How can only chanting be the all-inclusive process? What about studying the Vedas? What about practicing brahmachari life? What about pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities? All these, don't I have to do those also? Doubt may arise. So Krishna is clearing that doubt for us. He's saying, no, in pure bhakti, you attain the results of all of these processes. And on top of that, there is one more that no other process can give. As he said in the 22nd verse, attaining the supreme abode. That is only available in bhakti. So bhakti includes the results of all other processes, but in addition gives one more feature that no other process has. Now, if we know this, then is it so difficult to only pursue bhakti? No. Because there's nothing else to be done. It is the all-in-one. So Krishna now is concluding here on the superiority of bhakti before revealing in the next chapter this most confidential knowledge. So we heard at the end of chapter 6 that the devotees are better. They're the highest of all, most intimately united. Yoginam api sarvesham, right? Now we hear how and why the devotee is best. Because the bhakti yogi gets everything from all other paths, plus entry into the spiritual world. This is the best of all processes. All the rituals of life, living in the forest, under the guidance of Guru, eating only when instructed. Prabhupada gives all the details of what one should do. It's very arduous. Going to the forest in Vanaprastha ashram, living in tree bark, eating roots and berries, giving up everything that one has accumulated in life. All of those results of those activities are achieved by chanting the holy names of the Lord, by practicing pure devotional service. With one effort, everything else is achieved. And so Prabhupada says in the third paragraph, very beautiful quote. He says, the beauty of Krishna consciousness, however, is that by one stroke, by engaging in devotional service, one can surpass all the rituals of the different orders of life. So knowledge of this is what helps us remain fixed, to be exclusively focused in bhakti. No need to concern, what about this and what about that? Krishna is saying, all of those other processes, the results of that is already included within bhakti. And on top of that, one more. So Srila Prabhupada concludes this purport by talking about how by hearing about this, one's attraction increases. And as our attraction for Krishna increases, this mood or desire for pure devotional service manifests. All the way up to the point where nothing else matters. Everything else becomes less relevant. Right? We're going to gravitate to the higher taste. Just as a piece of metal, it will gravitate to the strongest magnet. So this is the highest and greatest of all. And so Prabhupada explains in the 4th paragraph that these chapters 7 through 12, they are the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 and the last 6 chapters, they are the coverings for this critical knowledge. And how to hear this, he emphasizes, hearing in the association of pure devotees. That is the greatest of fortune. To hear this knowledge from Srila Prabhupada, it is our greatest fortune. What else we could have? How fortunate we are that Srila Prabhupada presented this Bhagavad Gita to us. How we would know this important information Krishna has given without the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. How we could understand it without his purports to explain these verses. We would have no chance. So we are just the most fortunate of the fortunate. So the summary of all Krishna Prabhupada makes in the last paragraph, and a very sweet summary he gives, that when we come to understand the Bhagavad Gita by hearing from a pure devotee, it brings us to this platform of bhakti. And Prabhupada says, by bhakti, one dispels all one's misgivings about Krishna and his activities and forms, all the limitations and anarthas we have. All of that becomes dispelled by bhakti, which becomes inspired by acquiring this knowledge, hearing from a pure devotee. And then, when one is free from all their misgivings, one becomes fixed, undeviated, ananya chetaha, in bhakti. And what is the result of ananya bhakti? This is the most beautiful statement, one of the most beautiful statements I find in Prabhupada's purports in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, after these misgivings have been perfectly cleared away, one becomes fixed in one's study. Then one relishes the study of Bhagavad Gita and attains the state of feeling always Krishna conscious. And what happens then? The most beautiful of all things. Prabhupada says, in the advanced stage, one falls completely in love with Krishna. How sweet. It happens hearing from the pure devotee, through practicing bhakti, becoming free of our misgivings, becoming fixed in pure bhakti, and then one completely falls in love with Krishna. How romantic, how perfect. And then Prabhupada finishes this most beautiful statement with a statement. This highest perfectional stage of life enables the devotee to be transferred to Krishna's abode in the spiritual sky, Goloka Vrindavan, where the devotee becomes eternally happy. What more do we need to know than to take to the process of devotional service undeviatingly? What else we could fill our day with that would give us this type of result? Very sweet and last parts of this purport to this very beautiful verse and very convincing verse to us to take to pure devotional service. So this concludes chapter 8, and now we'll begin the most confidential knowledge. Whenever someone says, I have a secret, we want to know, what is it? What is it? So Krishna has a secret to tell us in chapter 9, and that we'll begin discussing next week. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna. Any discussion today? Comments? Clarifications?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam.
Hare Krishna. Dandavat pranams.
Prabhuji, you mentioned, I forgot to take notes, but you said the two things important at the time of death. You said some two things we got to do at the time of death.
Sorry, only one thing, which is to remember Krishna.
Oh.
So, or you can say, remember Krishna and never forget him. But yeah, remembering Krishna, right? Because Krishna said at the beginning of this chapter, that is the formula to attaining the eternal abode, from which one never returns. So that is the key process. But the devotee is not desiring just to think of Krishna at the time of death. The devotee is wanting to think of Krishna all the time. The pure devotee doesn't want to think of Krishna because they want to go to the spiritual world. The devotee wants to think of Krishna all the time because it is so blissful to think of Krishna and to render service to Krishna. And their desire to go to the spiritual abode is not to become free from birth and death, old age and disease. Their desire to go to the spiritual world is because there's unlimited facilities to serve Krishna. The devotee laments, this body is so poor, it has to sleep 6 hours. In those 6 hours, I can't serve Krishna. It is lamenting in that way. The gopis are lamenting, Lord Brahma, what kind of creator you are? This body has eyelids and it has to blink. When it blinks, I cannot see Krishna. So the devotees, let me go to the perfect abode, and there I can serve Krishna unlimitedly. So the desire is again to serve. And how to do that? How to get there? Remembering Krishna at the time of death. That's it.
Hare Krishna.
Hare.
Prabhuji, I have just one more question, Prabhuji.
Yes.
If you are in your own words, Prabhuji, if you have to describe what exactly is devotional service, how would you describe that, Prabhuji?
No, Prabhupada describes it. Activities aimed to please Krishna. Devotional service, it is service, an activity that is an expression of devotion, love. So activities performed as an expression of love for Krishna. That is bhakti. Activity performed as an expression of love for Krishna. That is why Prabhupada translated bhakti as devotional service. And what activities then we can perform that are pleasing to Krishna? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has told us. He quoted again and again and again. Harinam, Harinam, Harinam eva kevalam. That chant, chant, and chant. This is the most potent part of bhakti. But all activity, anything we consider bhakti, it must be activity meant to please Krishna as an expression of our love.
Wonderful, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Your answers are so simple, Prabhuji, and so profound. Love it.
It's because I am a fool, so I have to keep it simple for myself.
No, Prabhuji.
Right? But Prabhupada has made this very complicated and subtle science so accessible to us. He has given us this in such a crisp and precise way. That's why we're so fortunate to hear from him, because he's made this very accessible for us. Thank you, Lord.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare
Thank you so
Krishna.
much.
Any other questions, comments? So Hari Prabhu, I think your microphone may not be on. I saw you went off mute, but we're not hearing.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, now you can hear.
Yeah, now we can hear. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Dhanyavad
Very
pranam.
nice class, Prabhu. I'm very fortunate actually to hear all this information in the class from you. So I got this a little confusion about the creation, Prabhu. Like, what is the relation between Lord Shambhu, Lord Sadashiva in spiritual world, and Lord Vishnu as Garbhodaka Vishnu and Ananta Shesha?
Okay. If you, I gave a fairly detailed explanation coincidentally 2 weeks ago on a Wednesday class. There's a Chaitanya Charitamrita class. So if you want a more detailed explanation, you can also listen to that as a relation to the Purusha avatars. But let me describe briefly here. So Krishna expands himself, as we know, into Lord Balaram, and from Lord Balaram there are many subsequent expansions. And after the second quadruple expansions of Vasudeva, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha in Sankarsana, we have Mahavishnu, which is Karanadakshay Vishnu. Karanadakshay Vishnu is situated, we say, in the corner of the spiritual realm, and he is lying in the causal ocean, not casual. Sometimes we read that word and we say casual. It is the causal ocean, right? And from there, the manifest, the Mahatattva, all of the material elements, this pradhan comes, and by the glance of Mahavishnu, Karanadakshay Vishnu, the material world is agitated and the process begins. And then he impregnates all the living entities within the material world. So the living entities don't come from the agitation of matter, nor is the matter itself agitated on its own. It's agitated by a superior force. When we say agitated, it is put into motion. So within that material universe then, first comes another expansion of Lord Vishnu, another Purusha avatar, right, which is Garbhodakshay Vishnu. Garbhodakshay Vishnu, Lord Vishnu enters the universe, it is empty. There's nothing there. And so from the perspiration of his body, he forms the Garbha ocean, which fills half the universe. And there he lies on Ananta Shesh. And from there, the navel stem, navel comes this lotus stem. And that ultimately becomes a flower. And from there, Lord Brahma appears from that lotus flower. And then the creation is, the secondary portion of creation begins from Lord Brahma. But he is the empowered creator by Lord Vishnu. Now, Shambhu Tattva, Lord Shiva, what his responsibility is, specifically in the creation, when the living entities are impregnated into the material world, Mahavishnu never interacts with matter. He never touches matter. So it is Lord Shiva who, through Lord Shiva, the living entities are impregnated into the material creation. And then Lord Shiva enters and becomes one of the guna avatars, as the avatar of the mode of ignorance. Lord Brahma is the second guna avatar of mode of passion, and thus creation. So Lord Shiva destruction, Lord Brahma creation, and Lord Vishnu is in the mode of administering the mode of goodness, but again is never touching and coming in contact with the mode. So that's again a little bit of detail, but in that discussion we gave a little bit more expansive conversation as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was explaining this to Sanatana Goswami.
Yes, Prabhu, but what I am want to understand is the Lord Sadashiva, who is situated in the spiritual world, not entering into the material world. Now, if we see your creation chart, just before going to Vaikuntha, there is one called Kailash, which is Lord Sadashiva's place, which is actually a border for the all Vaikuntha planets.
Yes. So
I
that is
am talking about that Sadashiva,
okay.
not the one who is come as a Rudra Tattva in the material world.
Okay. So, and what is the question then?
The question is like Lord Sadashiva, which is situated in the spiritual world. Okay, next to Mahavishnu. So what is his activities or duty with respect to Mahavishnu and also Garbhodaya Vishnu and Anantashesha?
Well, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is within the material world,
Yeah.
right? So Mahavishnu is residing in the spiritual in the spiritual world, and we know Shambhu Tattva is an expansion from Vishnu Tattva, and he is administering these various material affairs and the activities that are taking place in the material world. So he has a very unique position because he does not he is above the Jiva Tattva, but he is an expansion from the Vishnu Tattva. And Prabhupada gives that always an example that's given from Brahma Samhita about milk and yogurt. So that Lord Shiva performs the service of facilitating this creative process and the affairs of the material world. Because Krishna himself, Lord Vishnu, doesn't directly engage in that activity. So that is the performance of also.
The Lord Shiva situated in Kailash in the spiritual world, he takes care of all these material affairs. So he is basically situated in the spiritual world, but he takes care of all these material affairs.
Him and his consort, right?
Yeah, Durga.
Durga Devi, right? So she is like the jailer, the superintendent of the material world. So they combine to perform these different activities as a service to their Lord, right? Their Supreme Lord, Krishna.
So, yeah, so from point of spiritual world, when the extinction comes to Garbhodaya Vishnu, so Lord Shiva as a Shiva Tattva coming from the Mahavishnu itself into the Garbhodaya Vishnu. In the material world, when the material world starts expansion to the Garbhodaya Vishnu.
Well, Lord Shiva enters the material world through, we know, actually Lord Brahma, right?
Yeah, through Brahma as a Rudra Tattva,
right.
not as a
That's
Shiva
right.
Tattva. Basically, the difference is that Rudra Tattva is basically he's in the material. He's actually in the material world, and he is in the guna. He is not out of guna Rudra Tattva. But Shiva Tattva, which is coming from spiritual world, which is as good as the Garbhodayaka Vishnu. That's what I'm trying to understand.
No, you cannot say as good. It's a different tattva. Vishnu
Yeah.
tattva and Shambhu tattva are different character, right? So Vishnu
Yeah.
tattva possesses again the 60 qualities. Shambhu tattva has 55. Jiva tattva has up to 50. So they're not on the same platform, but it's a very elevated platform,
Yeah, very.
right? It's a very elevated, but not we should not say that we cannot say the same, but a very elevated platform.
Elevated.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So sorry, Prabhu, to ask so many questions because I have
No,
one
no.
more class where it is said that Lord Shiva's guru is Anantashesha or Balram.
Yeah, he's chanting Ram Ram Ram.
Hmm.
He's chanting because he's coming through the expansions from Sankarshana.
Yeah.
So that is how all the avatars, all the expansions, they emanate through Balaram, not from Krishna directly. Krishna expands himself first as Balaram, and then from Balaram comes Narayan, then the first quadruple expansions, then the second. There's a whole sequence. So they ultimately all emanate through Lord Balaram. So yes, Lord Shiva's eternal, sort of devotion is to Lord Balaram through Sankarshana. Yeah. But that's why, and again, Lord Balaram is also the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? Prabhupada says, no difference, just difference in color.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Dandavas. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Hare Krishna. Mati.
One is that in chapter 26, there are two ways of passing from this material world. Then in Kurukshetra, Bhishmadeva is a pure devotee, Prabhu, but why he has to wait the Uttarayana? There is Dakshinayana Uttarayana, right? To pass in the bed of Garu. He is not a pure devotee.
Of course, he's a Mahajan. But he,
As per the verse explanation, it mentioned that the devotees does not wait to be these passed to the Uttarayana. Uttarayana is considered the auspicious, right?
devotee does not have to, but they can choose to leave because he had the benediction from his father that he can leave at any point. So, but what was the principal time that he left? In the presence of Krishna. Right? So, but if he left before the Uttarayan, then he still would have achieved the same destination. So it's not required. The point, so one may leave at an auspicious time, but if one leaves in the darkness also, or when the sun is in the southern time, there is no difference in result. That is the point. So one doesn't have to leave at a particular time, but he had the power to do it, and he left at this auspicious time in the presence of the most auspicious situation, which was the presence of Krishna. It's okay?
One question.
Yeah. Sorry, Prabhu, it's not coming clear. Can you speak a little bit louder?
So in verse 16, it mentioned that if one is Brahmaloka, one does not cultivate the Krishna consciousness, then he must return to earth. So if the person is Brahmaloka also, the person has to perform the Krishna consciousness to elevate to the higher planets.
Which higher planets? Spiritual world or higher material planets?
Spiritual world.
Krishna.
So it mentioned that if he does not perform the Krishna consciousness, he has to return back to the material world.
That's the very important point. That because Krishna said the only way to achieve the supreme eternal planet is what? bhakti, devotional service to Krishna. He says it in verse 22 and then says in 28. That's the only way. Only. So even if you reach up to Brahma Loka, you must practice bhakti. Now, Prabhupada explains that many great devotees will reach to the point of Brahma Loka, where they can, and then they continue to practice devotional service, and at the end of the material creation, from there they'll be transferred to the spiritual world. But if one is in Brahma Loka enjoying the very opulent world and enjoying their senses, then one will not go. So one must continue their devotional service. But that's why Prabhupada said, instead of doing this step by step, because if you go to Brahma Loka, you may become, wow, this is amazing, seeing it to be an A-class jail cell, but not realizing that is also temporary, is also limited. It also isn't perfect. But if we go there in our immature, ignorant state, not knowing, ignorant meaning not knowing all, then we may become attracted and think this is it. I've got the best of all. So that is why Krishna is giving this detail within this chapter to explain all the different options and then establishing for why his abode is the best. So one must do bhakti even in the highest planetary systems within the material world in order to continue progressing to Krishna. But by doing devotional service, one can go directly from Bhurloka to the spiritual world. One does not need to go step by step. And that's why Prabhupada said, this is the safe, certain, and direct, non-stop flight path. Chant the holy names, take shelter of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada, Guru Parampara, and go directly back. No chance of being deviated. Is that okay, Prabhu?
I was thinking they will enjoy and come back. They will not remember of Krishna there actually in higher planets.
Actually, that's what mostly happens. That is the danger. In Srimad Bhagavatam, we see that demigods, they're praying. Let us come to the material world. Hey, why? Why are they praying? Why? Because the opulences of the heavenly planets are a barrier to Krishna consciousness. Unless one is really, really strong, the opulences of the material world, the heavenly planets, become a barrier to practicing bhakti. So they're praying, better we come to the material world. This Bhurloka, it is easier. Hare Krishna. Thank you, brother. Anything else?
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Dharma Pranams. Congratulations to Srila Prabhupada birthday. Very beautiful point, Prabhuji. Last point which you mentioned, that the chances, when just like in the material world here right now, the ones who are in a very opulent position or something, it's very hard for them to, in that very happy situation, very hard to pursue Krishna consciousness. Same thing when we go to Indraloka or Brahmaloka, all these places, then what percent chance is there for us to actually have that motivation to do Krishna consciousness then? So this is the best time probably. And so that's the biggest motivation probably, I think, for us to pursue it now more than ever. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah. Prabhuji, this part, can you still explain the safe, certain, and direct? Can you explain why you are saying safe and why certain and why direct, please? Thank you.
Yeah. So Prabhupada is saying that this bhakti process, it is safe because when we start to become engaged in Krishna consciousness, if you can come to the platform of pure bhakti, there's no chance to ever be not in remembrance of Krishna, because it's so sweet and it's so perfect and so blissful and complete And thus, it is certain that one will achieve the desired goal, which is eternal service of Krishna. Right? And it is direct because one doesn't have to go through any sequential process. One can come directly to bhakti, and from bhakti, pure bhakti, be directly promoted to the spiritual world. It is not like I have to go, from this planetary system to a higher planetary system to, I cannot go from 3rd grade to 8th grade directly. I cannot go from 8th grade to college directly. I must go progressively. But in Krishna consciousness, by doing bhakti, one can go directly from the lowest of platforms to the spiritual world. So that is how Krishna or Prabhupada is explaining that this pure devotional service, it is safe, certain, and direct. It doesn't mean, though, that in practicing bhakti, we are free from the potential to deviate. So the process is very safe, certain, and direct, but we must remain fixed in that process. We must maintain the desire to remain in pure devotional service. So, but if we do, then it is guaranteed. Sometimes we wonder and worry, what if I forget Krishna? What if I don't? Don't worry. Just practice devotional service. And Prabhupada said, even if one is not in the platform of pure bhakti, if they have desire, Krishna will still make it easy for them. Because sometimes we think when we see this easy verse, well, yeah, he makes it easy for the pure devotees. Well, what about me? So Prabhupada says, don't worry. Even if you're not at the pure platform yet, but you have desire, Krishna will make it happen. So our principal function right now, today, is to cultivate this strong desire for pure devotional service. And then safe, certain, and direct will manifest for us. Just desire it and let Krishna make it accessible and easy for us. Okay, Mataji?
Thank you, Prabhuji. You make it so beautifully, saying that it's so accessible to us. This highly exalted moon kind of situation. You make it like something like it's at least accessible to us. We have a sincere desire. So that's wonderful.
That is the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Because he says that, right? Just desire. So it is accessible. We should never feel impossible. Because Krishna loves us so much. And this is what he's going to keep reminding us in the next chapter. He loves us so much. Actually, we can feel it this way also. If you are a mother and father, and if a child has doubt in our love for them, that actually doesn't make us feel good. But when that child has confidence and faith in the love of mother and father, that makes mother and father feel good. So we should also have faith in Krishna's love for us. It's there. We just have to want it and desire it. As long as I have the desire, I have full confidence. Yes, I will become someday a pure devotee. Because Krishna will make it happen. I just have to desire it. Thank you.
Prabhuji, last thing, one thing. You said this was the crux of the entire thing, right? You said that main reason would be that because why we should do the pure devotional services, which helps you to attain all the results of other processes. Plus, you get the added bonus that you are able to attain the supreme goal. When we talk about the results of all other processes, I mean, I know you've already explained. I don't want you to go into just like briefly what we are talking about, the results of all other processes.
Yeah. So what the point of that verse is to give us faith in the practice of pure bhakti. Because what happens when we speak about just chant, just do pure devotional service, there's always the potential for some lingering doubt. Well, but what about this process? And what about that process? And what about this activity? Don't I have to do, Shraddha ceremony for my forefathers? And don't I have to do, pay my debts to the devatas? And don't I have to, perform this charitable process? And, because these are all other processes, right? So in order for us to be confident in the process of bhakti, Krishna is saying that whatever results may come from those activities, they're already included in bhakti. They're already there. So don't think that by exclusively doing bhakti, because Krishna is saying ananya cheta, undeviatingly, never ever doing anything else. Don't think, okay, but I'm missing something else. Have faith that it is all included. Now, the devotee isn't looking for the results of doing these different, rituals and different rights and duties and responsibilities. They're not, right? Because with many of those, why we do these different processes is to obtain some, frankly, material benefit in this world. That is mostly the goal of that. Some of them have some other objectives. Of course, the devotee doesn't have any of those desires. But the point that Krishna was making here was to get us to have full faith in exclusive bhakti. Because we can only have faith to exclusively do bhakti if we know nothing is missing, that it is complete and all in one. Otherwise, there will be some lingering doubt. Don't I have to do this? Don't I have to do that? So this is the conclusive statement that Krishna is making. And Prabhupada takes the process, takes the purport to say that, in the beginning of life, one should enter brahmachari life and, study under guru and beg alms and, go through this austerity for the training process. And then one, if they choose to enter grahastha life, has to perform various rituals and sacrifices and do things. And then entering vanaprastha ashram and, abandoning all the, grahastha life comforts and entering into, the forest. And, all these processes are there for one's gradual progression. Prabhupada is saying, in one stroke, one effort, by bhakti, one can achieve all the benefits of those different processes, right? Like the process of going into the ashram is for the purification and the discipline and the austerity, the sacrifices in grahastha ashram and charities is for the renunciation. All those things, they manifest automatically with the single stroke of bhakti. So one doesn't have to go, through these different processes. So that's how Prabhupada takes the purport to Krishna's verse. So.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. So if not, we'll begin discussing most confidential knowledge. Krishna has a secret, and he's going to share it with all of us, and we'll enjoy discussing this most confidential knowledge. Thank you very much. Dandavat pranam to all of the devotees. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki